Fabricadabra at LPL presents Year of the Tiger. We are going to embroider a tiger's face as well as some fireworks in celebration of the Lunar New Year and the Lafayette Reads Together book, Clues to the Universe by Christina Lee. The supplies we'll need are a square of black cloth, some embroidery floss, some chalk, a sewing needle or embroidery needle, a pin and a rubber band, and a pair of scissors, as well as an embroidery hoop. If you get our kits, you're going to get an embroidery hoop that was made in our makerspace on the 3D printer. And the rubber band is for holding the clasp tight. I'm going to start with a square. This one is a 5 by 5 inch square of black cotton fabric. And then I'm going to get my embroidery hoop and take out the middle part of the hoop. I'm going to lay that, centering it on the square, and then I'm going to use my chalk pencil to draw the circle. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the template of the tiger's face. Okay, I'm going to flip that over, and I'm going to use a regular piece of chalk to shade over any of the places that I want to actually copy. There's another way to transfer the pattern to the fabric that's much simpler, and it's the use of transfer or copy paper that's used specifically for fabrics. And that way you could transfer the pattern directly to the fabric. Okay, so next up what you want to do is center this on top of that black square. And I'm just eyeballing this. If you know of a better way of doing this, go ahead and use that. If you have some sort of fabric transfer paper and you can put this directly on to the fabric, go ahead and do it that way. This is just another way I'm showing you in case you don't have the transfer paper. So as you can see right now, what I'm doing is I'm just simply using a pen to draw over all of the different lines that I'm going to want to use in my pattern. And this is just going to give me the placement of everything, as well as giving me lines to follow. And as you can see, our tiger has 22 at the top, and it also has a Chinese symbol for a tiger on its forehead. And I'm just finishing up the details, almost done. And I'm going to freehand some fireworks around it instead of using what's on this pattern. So as you can see, I did not get this centered quite right, so I'm going to dust off the chalk, and then I'm going to do it again so that I have it centered more correctly, and here is the finished product there. Then I'm going to take the inner part of my hoop, place it down, put the fabric on top, and then using my fingers to help me find where the edges are, I'm going to match that up with the circle, and then I'm going to take the outer part of the hoop and I'm going to put that over it, and then I'm going to grab my rubber band and use that to secure the hoop. Now this is only going to apply if you're using our kits. If you got one of our kits for this, then it will come with an embroidery hoop that was made in our makerspace on the 3D printer. But you may have your own hoop that you're using, and you would just secure it the way that hoop is, usually with some sort of screw. Okay, so next up, I'm going to show you how to prepare your embroidery floss and then thread that through your needle. So this is a skein of embroidery floss, and it comes in 6 separate strings. And what I'm doing for this project is I'm separating those strings, so because I don't want to use the full 6 because it's such a small pattern that I'm using. I feel like 6 would be too big, so I'm actually using half of that. I'm using 3 of the strings from the skein. Next up, we have our needle, our embroidery needle. And then I'm just threading those 3 through the eye of the needle. Then you're going to get to the end of the of the floss that you're using to do the embroidery, and you're going to make a little knot on the end, which is what I've done here, and then cut off any excess. Okay, so now we're going to start with the actual embroidery. So you always want to start in the back and coming to the front, and we're actually doing the top part of the head of the tiger first. So I'm going to be using a stitch that's called a stem stitch. You're going to go 1 stitch length ahead. Okay, you're going to want to keep a little loop of it out, and then you're going to come up from the bottom again, somewhere in the middle or so. Well, it doesn't matter which way you pull your thread through, as long as you remain consistent throughout the stitching. So I pulled my thread out through that underneath, that hoop to the right side, and now I'm going to do the same. I'm going to go a stitch length forward again. And I pulled that hoop all the way tight, and so what I've used is the tip of my needle just to pull it out again. And then I'm going to find about that middle area or so. It could be closer to the original part of the thread. And okay, now you see I put my hoop on, or my loop on the correct side so that I can pull the thread through. And it makes a nice tight thing. You're not going to see the full effect of it until I've done a few more stitches, which I am doing very fast. I don't normally do it this fast. This is me fast forwarding. So, and you're just going to keep doing a stitch length forward, go through the back, come up through the back, and then through the hoop and pull it tight. And I'm just going to keep doing that until I get all the way around to the other end of the beard of the tiger. Yay! And as you can see, it's making a really nice pattern here with the thread. It's a really nice stitch to use, and it's really very simple. Once you get the hang of it, it's going to be a breeze. And like I said, I'm going to make it all the way back around, and I'm going to do the beard in a different stitch. Okay, so now we're going to do the beard, as I call it, of the tiger. And I'm going to use a simple back stitch for this because it's so tiny. And I'm making really super tiny stitches because it's very detailed work, and it's very much in a small space. So I apologize for the blurriness. I actually correct this later on in the video. So I went one stitch length ahead, okay, and then it's kind of hard to see. Okay, so I did 1 stitch length up into that little notch, and then I came down using a back stitch. So I went 2 stitch lengths forward and then came back to the original stitch. But here is where you're going to see it a little bit better. Again, this is the back stitch. Okay, so here we go. Look, I'm going to go that stitch length forward, pull it up from the back, and then go backwards to the end of the previous stitch. So that probably makes more sense than what I was talking about before, because you can see it better. And of course I have this on super fast, but it's a really simple stitch to do. It's one of the most simple stitches you can do in embroidery. Okay, so now I'm going to sew the ears, and I'm going to be using a stitch called the split stitch. Now remember to keep your stitches tiny when you're doing any kind of curved lines, because it's going to make the shape of that curve a much smoother. So I'm going to come up from the back for my split stitch. Okay. Pull the thread all the way through. You're going to go ahead 1 stitch length, however long you want that to be. Usually kind of tiny for this. Okay. Pull it down to the back, and I'm going to stop right here because I want to be able to show you where I'm going to come up. And it's kind of hard to see once I pull the stitch, and once I pull the thread all the way through. So I'm going to come up right in about this middle of those two. But the thing is I'm going to pull that stitch tight first, and I'm actually going to come up through the middle of the threads. Now, because I did 3 threads, it's uneven, so I'm going to have 2 threads on one side and 1 on the other. If that's a problem for you, go ahead and use 4 threads instead of 3 threads when you are separating them. Okay, so now I've pulled my thread through, and I'm going to go ahead another stitch. Sorry for the shakiness. And then I'm going to come up right in the middle and split those threads. So it's slightly different than the stem stitch. It's kind of the same in that we're coming up basically in the middle, but it's a little bit different because we're actually coming, instead of pulling it through a loop, we're actually pulling it up through the stitches of through the threads of the stitch. Okay, so I'm going to go one more ahead, and I'm going to come up from underneath right in the middle and split those threads, hence why it's called a split stitch. And here is one completed ear, and I'm going to do the same exact thing, the split stitch, for the other ear. So now we're going to do this eye line that wraps around the snout of the tiger, and I'm going to take it all the way around to the other eye, and we're going to be doing the split stitch again. So you come up from the back, go 1 stitch length forward, and then if you remember the split stitch, we're going to come up through the middle of the 2 points of the stitch, and we're actually going to split the threads just like that. And get a little closer, and then we're going to speed it up too because we've done this stitch before. So a stitch length ahead, then come up through the threads of the stitch, and again stitch length ahead, come up through the middle, splitting the threads of your stitch. And this is the finished product of it. Looks pretty nice. Next up, we're going to do the under eye portions, and I'm going to do that using a back stitch. And we're going to do that for the under eye portions of both eyes. Okay, so now we're going to start with the nose, and I'm just going to do a simple back stitch around it. Okay, and the next step we're going to do is what's called a satin stitch. So the first thing we do, it's really simple. It's basically a bunch of straight stitches within a certain area. So we're going to stay within the bounds of the back stitched nose, and we're going to do the satin stitch, which is just very closely doing lines right next to each other. So come up from the back, make a stitch right next to the stitch before it. See? Now you can get closer than that and have a more satiny looking stitch, or you can be further apart and see some of the fabric underneath it. But whatever you do, you kind of want to keep those lines straight. I didn't do a great job of keeping mine straight, so I'm having to go back and fix a few little spots. But that is the finished product. That is a satin stitch. Okay, so next up we're going to do the whiskers of the tiger. So we want to start about halfway in between the nose and the snout, and then go out towards, on this one we're doing the right side facing the tiger. So we're going to start here and then go out to here. And this is just a straight stitch. It's literally just one straight stitch. It's what makes up the satin stitch, and it can be done and at any length, and in any kind of pattern or no pattern at all. Okay, put the second one, and here's the third one. And make sure to do the other side. Now we're going to do the 3 dots that are over the nose. And this one is also an actually simple stitch. It's called the French knot. And we're going to wrap the thread around the needle tip twice, and then go back down, not through the same hole, but through very close to it. And then we're going to gently pull our threads through until it forms a little knot. And it's literally that easy. So here's another one, a little bit quicker up, and camera angle isn't great, but I think the next one we'll see a little bit better. Come up from the back, wrap the thread around. This time I'm doing it 4 times to give it a little extra bulk, and then go next to the hole that you made coming up. Okay, so next up we're going to do the lines on the cheeks of the tiger, and I'm going to be using the stem stitch again. So just to show you how that stitch goes, you come up from the back, you're going to go 1 stitch length forward. You're going to pull your thread, but not all the way through. You want to leave a loop. And then you're going to come up, you know, somewhere in the middle or somewhere in between the 2 ends of the stitch. And then you're going to come out on one side of the loop or the other, and you're going to pull your thread all the way through. It doesn't matter which side of the loop that you choose, as long as you stay consistent throughout the stitching. So all of your stitches should come out one side or the other, not back and forth. So again, coming up through the loop. This time we're going out towards the right side. And then another stitch length forward. Pull it till you have a loop. Then push up in between your stitches, in between the ends of your stitch, and then pull the thread through the loop. And that's what it looks like finished, and then we're going to do the other side. Okay, so now I'm going to do 2 curved rows of what I call tiny dots. Basically this is a straight stitch, but it's an incredibly tiny stitch, so that it looks like a dot on the fabric instead of a line. And I'm going to stitch along that chalk line. That's where I'm going to put my dots. I'm going to try to put the same amount of dots on each side. So as you can see, very much just a straight stitch. You come up from the back, you go over just the tiniest little minuscule amount, and then you go down back through the thread. And it gets you these little dot-like stitches that just add some visual interest to your tiger and mimic what was on the template that we're using, the pattern. Okay, and then I'm going to do that for the other side as well. And then I'm also going to do that same type of dot along the outside of both cheeks of the tiger. And here at the top, on the top of the head of the tiger, there's the year 2022. That's the year of the dragon in the Chinese or lunar calendar. And I'm using, for this one, I'm using the split stitch. And I'm just making very tiny stitches and going all the way, following the chalk lines that make the 2022. Okay, and now for the Chinese symbol, and I'm going to show you this one really quick because it's really going to just be a series of straight stitches. I'm trying to keep, and then with a few back stitches around the curved edges of the lines. So Okay, the last thing to do is add some fireworks around the tiger's face because we're celebrating this Lunar New Year or Chinese New Year, and that involves a lot of fireworks. So you can start anywhere. I'm just kind of freehanding mine. If you wanted to draw out the patterns of the how you want your fireworks to look ahead of time, that's fine. You can do that. I'm just kind of freehanding it. And we'll see what happens. Mostly I'm going to be using a bunch of straight stitches of different lengths, and kind of making a circle in the middle without actually defining that circle. And then I'm also trying to count for the lines of the fireworks that would actually be behind portions of the tiger's ears or face. And so just be a little bit careful if you're going to do something like that. Now, you don't have to do this. You could use the pattern that the patterns that come on the pattern we have, the template we have. It had like stars and flowers and little X's and stuff. You could do that instead. It's totally up to you. You could. And here is our final product. You can see I kind of went a little crazy with the fireworks. I used a few French knots as well as some of those little tiny dots. And then here is a sample that I had done with using a different thread, and you can see my fireworks are actually a little bit smaller and a little bit more involved. Thank you for watching, and happy sewing! And don't forget to pick up your free copy of Lafayette Reads Together book for this year, which is Clues to the Universe by Christina Lee.